Winter, 1875. Sarah Mitchell stumbles through knee-deep snow, her pregnant form barely visible in the gathering darkness. Driven from her town by whispers and condemnation, she faces a choice: surrender to the brutal cold or press on into Apache territory. Just as her legs give out and the snow begins to feel like a warm blanket, a shadow moves through the twilight. Strong hands lift her from the ground, not the rough grip of soldiers or settlers, but the gentle touch of a warrior who sees beyond her shame. In his eyes she finds something she thought lost forever: hope. But can a woman carrying society's scorn find acceptance among those her people call enemies? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 3 months earlier, Sarah had stood before her classroom in Millbrook, Massachusetts, teaching grammar to rows of attentive students. Her fingers traced familiar paths across the blackboard, chalk dust settling on the dark wool of her dress. The gold locket at her throat, her mother's last gift, caught the autumn sunlight streaming through tall windows. "Remember, children," she'd said, her voice steady and warm. "Words have power. They can build up or tear down, create or destroy." How bitterly those words would return to haunt her. That evening, as shadows lengthened across the schoolhouse floor, Thomas Crawford lingered after class. The school board chairman's son was 19, too old for primary education, but his father insisted he complete his basic studies before taking over the family lumber mill. "Miss Mitchell," he'd said, those dark eyes holding something that made her step back. "Father says you're the finest teacher Millbrook's ever had." She'd smiled politely, gathering her books. "Your father is kind, but you should go home now, Thomas. It's getting late." He'd moved closer instead. "I've seen how you look at me when you think no one's watching. Thomas, you're mistaken. Please leave." Her heart hammered against her ribs as he blocked her path to the door. What followed haunted her dreams for months: the struggle, her screams muffled by his hand, the sound of her dress tearing. When she finally broke free and ran, her locket had snapped, falling somewhere in the darkness. The next morning, Thomas told a different story. His father believed him, of course. The respectable son versus the young schoolteacher who lived alone, who'd never married, who kept to herself too much to be truly proper. The whispers started immediately. Women drew their children away when Sarah passed. Men's eyes followed her, with something worse than scorn. When her morning sickness began 6 weeks later, the whispers became shouts. The school board didn't even meet to discuss it. They simply sent a letter of dismissal. Her own family 3 states away replied to her desperate letter with 3 cold lines: "You have brought shame to this family. Do not contact us again. May God have mercy on your soul." The local midwife, Mrs. Beaumont, was the only one who showed kindness. "Head west," she'd whispered, pressing coins and dried beef into Sarah's hands. "My sister's people settled in Colorado territory. I'll write ahead, tell her to expect you." But Sarah never made it to Colorado. Winter came early that year, catching her in the New Mexico territory. The stagecoach driver refused to take her further, leaving her at a small trading post. "Apache territory ahead," he'd warned. "Ain't risking my horses or my neck for your kind." Now, as Sarah huddles deeper into her threadbare shawl, the gold locket's absence feels like a physical wound. She's lost everything: family, reputation, profession, even her mother's last gift. The baby shifts within her, a reminder that she's not completely alone. She rubs her swollen belly through the worn fabric of her dress. "We'll survive," she whispers to her unborn child, though the howling wind threatens to steal her words. Somehow we'll survive. The snow is falling faster now, erasing her tracks almost as soon as she makes them. Ahead, the mountains loom like dark shadows against the gray sky. Somewhere in those peaks, the Apache make their winter camps. Mrs. Beaumont's final words echo in her mind. "Better to trust the Indians than die in the snow. At least they'll give you a clean death." Sarah takes another stumbling step forward. Clean death or not, It's her only choice now. The baby kicks again, stronger this time as if in agreement. The first sign of Apache presence nearly escaped Sarah's notice. A single set of moccasin prints in the fresh snow, heading north. She might have missed them entirely if she hadn't stumbled, her frozen hands breaking her fall. There, at eye level, the distinctive pattern stood out against the white. A clear heel mark, the ball of a foot, moving with purpose through the storm. Sarah's education had included nothing about tracking, but 3 months on the trail had taught her to read, the basic language of the wilderness. These tracks were fresh, perhaps only hours old. She pulled herself up, one hand braced against a snow-laden pine, the other cradling her swollen belly. The torn letter of dismissal from the school board crinkled in her pocket. Her last piece of paper, now serving as tinder for fires she could rarely risk lighting. The irony wasn't lost on her. The very document that had destroyed her old life might help preserve her new one. The wind changed direction, bringing with it the faintest scent of wood smoke. Sarah's heart quickened. Smoke meant fire, and fire meant people. But in these mountains, people could mean either salvation or death. She stood motionless, weighing her options. The storm was worsening, the temperature dropping with the sun. Her supplies had run out 2 days ago. No food, no water except what she could melt in her mouth. The baby had been unusually still today, conserving energy, instinctively knowing its mother's desperation. A branch cracked somewhere in the gathering darkness. Sarah whirled toward the sound, her movements clumsy with cold and fear. Nothing moved in the grey twilight except falling snow, but she could feel eyes on her now. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and her breath came in quick, visible puffs. "Please," she whispered. Though to whom? God, the watching eyes, or her? Unborn child, she wasn't sure. "Please!" Another crack, closer this time. A shadow detached itself from a stand of juniper trees. Sarah's legs gave way, and she sank to her knees in the snow. The shadow resolved itself into a man, tall, wrapped in furs, a rifle held casually, but ready in his hands. His face bore the weathered features of the Apache, his dark eyes regarding her with neither hostility nor compassion. Behind him, 2 more figures emerged from the trees. One carried a bow, already strung but not drawn. The other held only a long knife, its blade catching what little light remained in the storm. Sarah didn't move. She couldn't if she wanted to. Her legs had gone numb, and exhaustion dragged at her like lead weights. The first warrior took a step closer, then stopped. His eyes moved from her face to her swollen belly, and something flickered in his expression. He spoke, his words incomprehensible to her ears, but somehow gentle in tone. When she didn't respond, he tried again in heavily accented Spanish, which Sarah knew only from her brief time at the trading post. "Lost?" he asked, making it sound more like "lost-o." Sarah nodded, her teeth chattering too hard to speak. The warrior conferred briefly with his companions, their voices low and musical in their native tongue. Snow continued to fall, gathering on Sarah's shoulders and hair, making her look like a statue slowly being erased by the storm. Finally, the first warrior slung his rifle across his back and approached her. He moved with the fluid grace of a mountain lion, making no sound despite the snow. When he reached her, he crouched down to meet her eyes. This close, she could see the intricate beadwork on his clothing, the eagle feather tied into his long black hair, the lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "Come," he said in Spanish, extending his hand, "or die here." It wasn't really a choice at all. Sarah placed her frozen hand in his warm one, feeling the strength in his grip as he helped her to her feet. When her legs buckled, he caught her. With surprising gentleness, without a word, he lifted her into his arms as easily as if she were a child. The last thing Sarah saw before exhaustion claimed her was the school board's letter slipping from her pocket, carried away by the wind. Like the pages of her old life, it disappeared into the swirling snow, leaving no trace behind. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, aware only of warmth and motion. Strong arms carried her through the storm, and occasionally voices spoke, in low tones around her. When she finally opened her eyes fully, she found herself in a small cave, a fire casting orange light on rock walls. An eagle feather medicine bundle hung above her head, its beadwork catching the firelight. The warrior who had carried her sat cross-legged nearby, feeding small sticks into the fire. In its light, she could study him properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a face that managed to be both fierce and gentle. A long scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, old and white against his copper skin. "Water," he said in Spanish, offering a wooden cup. When Sarah struggled to sit up, he supported her back with a steady hand. The water was warm and tasted of herbs she didn't recognize. "Thank you," she managed in halting Spanish. "My name is—" "Sarah." He nodded slowly. "Takoda," he replied, touching his chest. Then he gestured to his companions. "Nashoba, Kichi." The other two warriors acknowledged her with slight nods, their faces impassive. Takoda's next words in Spanish came carefully, as if he was translating in his head. "The baby moves." Sarah placed a hand on her belly, and as if on cue, the child kicked strongly. Relief flooded through her. The baby was all right. She nodded, and something like approval flickered across Takoda's face. He reached into a leather, in pouch at his belt, and withdrew something that made Sarah's breath catch. An eagle feather, similar to the one in his hair, but smaller and adorned with tiny blue beads. With grave ceremony, he tied it to a strand of her hair. "Protection," he explained, touching the feather gently. "For both." Nashoba said something in Apache, his tone concerned. Takoda replied at length, occasionally gesturing toward Sarah, and then to the storm outside. Though she couldn't understand the words, the meaning was clear. They were deciding her fate. Finally, Takoda turned back to her. "Storm ends tomorrow. Then we go to winter camp." He paused, searching for the right Spanish words. "Our medicine woman, she helps with babies. You stay until baby comes." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" Takoda was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he spoke, he switched between Apache and Spanish, as if some thoughts could only be expressed in his native tongue. "Many winters ago, my sister—" He touched his chest, pain briefly crossing his features. "White soldiers came. She ran into storm, heavy with child. No one helped her." He met Sarah's eyes. "Creator shows you to us. We help. The depth of the tragedy and the grace of its resolution through her own salvation struck Sarah to her core." She reached out hesitantly and touched Takoda's hand. "I'm sorry about your sister." He allowed the contact for a moment before gently withdrawing his hand. Standing, he moved to the cave entrance, where Kichi had been keeping watch. The two men spoke quietly while Nashoba tended the fire. Sarah sipped more of the herbal water, feeling strength slowly return to her limbs. Her wet clothes had been covered with soft furs, and someone had wrapped her feet in rabbit skins. The cave was small but warm, and for the first time in months, she felt safe. As night deepened, Takoda returned to the fire. He settled nearby, close enough to watch over her, but far enough to maintain propriety. Opening a small bundle, he revealed strips of dried meat. "Eat," he said. "Tomorrow, long walk." Sarah accepted the food gratefully. As she ate, Takoda began to hum softly, a low, melodic sound that seemed to fill the cave with peace. Outside, the storm raged on, but here, in this small space between worlds, Sarah felt something she hadn't dared to feel since that terrible evening in the schoolhouse. Hope. Dawn broke clear and cold, the storm having spent its fury during the night. Sarah stood unsteadily at the cave's entrance, wrapped in a buffalo robe Takoda had provided. Below them, the valley stretched white and pristine, broken only by the dark shapes of juniper and pine. Her borrowed moccasins, though awkward on her, swollen feet kept out the bitter cold better than her ruined boots ever had. "We go," Dakota said simply, adjusting the robe around her shoulders. His hands lingered for a moment, checking the eagle feather he'd tied in her hair. "Stay close." The journey took most of the day. Dakota broke trail through the deep snow, while Neshoba and Kitchi flanked them, alert for any threat. When Sarah tired, which happened often, they stopped without complaint, allowing her to rest. Once, when she stumbled, Dakota caught her arm, his grip gentle but sure. "Look," he said late in the afternoon, pointing to a sheltered valley ahead. Smoke rose from between the trees. Dozens of cooking fires, hidden cleverly so their smoke dispersed before rising too high. As they descended, Sarah caught glimpses of conical lodges, their smoke-stained hides blending perfectly with the winter landscape. Children spotted them first. Their shouts brought others from the lodges, women in bright blankets, men with rifles, held casually but ready. Sarah felt their stares like physical touches as Dakota led her through the camp. An elderly woman emerged from a large lodge, her silver hair bound in 2 long braids. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp. As she took in Sarah's condition, she spoke rapidly to Dakota, who responded with respect evident in his tone. "My grandmother," he explained to Sarah. "She is medicine woman, says you stay with her." Before Sarah could respond, a man pushed through the gathering crowd. Unlike the others, he wore a mixture of Apache and white man's clothing, a cavalry, coat incongruous over buckskin leggings. His face was hard as he confronted Dakota. "Brother," he said in clear English, "have you lost your mind, bringing a white woman here?" Dakota's response in Apache was quiet but firm. He gestured to Sarah's belly, then to the sky, speaking of what Sarah assumed was their encounter in the storm. The man's face remained stern, but something in Dakota's words seemed to reach him. The medicine woman interrupted their debate, her voice carrying authority despite its age. She took Sarah's hand, her fingers strong and warm, and led her toward the lodge. Inside, the air was warm and sweet with herbs. A small fire burned in the center, and soft furs covered the ground. "Sit," the old woman said, in heavily accented English, patting a pile of blankets. "Rest now. Safe here." She touched Sarah's belly with gentle hands, nodding to herself. Then she pressed a cup of hot tea into Sarah's hands. "Drink. Good for baby." Sarah sipped the tea, tasting mint and other herbs she couldn't identify. Outside, she could hear the continued debate, but the medicine woman seemed unconcerned. Busy, hanging a new bundle of herbs to dry. "My son," she said suddenly, pointing toward the voices outside. "Angry now, but good man. Understand soon." She smiled, revealing surprisingly strong white teeth. "I am Nijoni. You sleep here. Tomorrow we make you new clothes." She fingered Sarah's threadbare dress with disapproval. No good for winter. The tea spread warmth through Sarah's body, and exhaustion began to overtake her. Nijoni helped her. "Lie down," tucking furs around her with grandmother's care. As Sarah drifted toward sleep, she heard Dakota's voice one last time, closer now, speaking softly with his grandmother. Her last thought before sleep took her was how strange it was that, here, among people she'd been taught to fear, she felt safer than she had in her own community. The eagle feather brushed her cheek, a reminder of unexpected grace in the midst of winter's fury. Sarah woke to the sounds of women's voices and the smell of cooking. A clay pot bubbled near the fire, releasing the aroma of something rich and unfamiliar. Nijoni sat cross-legged nearby, sorting through bundles of dried plants while speaking softly with 2 younger women. "Ah, you wake," Nijoni said, noting Sarah's open eyes. "Come, eat first, then learn." The stew in the clay pot turned out to be venison, tender and flavored with wild onions and herbs. Sarah ate gratefully, watching as the younger women laid out pieces of soft-tanned deerskin and began measuring them against her worn dress. "New clothes," Nijoni explained. "Cannot have you looking like lost ghost." Her wrinkled face creased with amusement. "Besides, baby needs room to grow." The morning passed in a blur of activity. The women, who Sarah learned were called Taluta and Mapia, taught her the basics of Apache dressmaking, their patience making up for the language barrier. When Sarah's fingers proved skilled with a bone needle, their approval was evident in their smiles. "Teacher hands," Taluta said in halting English, touching Sarah's calloused fingers. "Good for medicine work too, maybe." Around midday, Takoda appeared at the lodge entrance. He looked different in the daylight, less mysterious but no less impressive. He carried a bundle wrapped in hide. "For you," he said, placing it beside Sarah. Inside was a pair of beaded moccasins, sized perfectly for her swollen feet. The beadwork pattern matched the eagle feather in her hair. "Thank you," Sarah said, touching the intricate beading. "They're beautiful." Takoda shrugged, but pleasure flickered in his dark eyes. "Need good shoes to walk new path." He hesitated, then added, "When you're ready, I show you camp. Learn our ways?" Before Sarah could respond, his brother appeared behind him. The man's face had softened somewhat since yesterday, though wariness remained in his stance. "If she's to stay," he said in English, "she should know who we are." He met Sarah's eyes directly. "I am Joseph. Before the agency school, I was called Running Wolf. Takoda is my brother by blood, and now it seems you are our problem." "Joseph," Takoda said sharply, but his brother raised a hand. "Peace, brother. I don't oppose her staying. The council has spoken. But she must understand, this is not a game. What happens here, who we are, where we winter, these things must remain secret." Sarah sat straighter, meeting his gaze. "I understand, and I'm grateful, not just for shelter, but for—" She touched her belly. "For giving us a chance." Joseph studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Perhaps my brother's heart sees what my suspicious mind does not." He turned to leave, then paused. "The cavalry patrol passes through this valley every new moon. Remember that, if you think of leaving." After he left, Takoda touched the eagle feather in Sarah's hair. "My brother, he carries many wounds, but his heart is good." He offered his hand. "Come, I show you our home." The Apache winter camp revealed itself slowly as Takoda led her through it. What had seemed like random placement of lodges actually followed a careful pattern, providing both protection from the elements and clear lines of sight in all directions. Women worked at cooking fires, scraping hides, or crafting winter goods. Children played in the snow, their laughter bright in the cold air. Men maintained weapons, repaired equipment, or stood guard at discreet posts around the perimeter. "Your people are very organized," Sarah observed, remembering the chaos of pioneer camps she'd passed on her journey west. Takoda smiled slightly. "We survive because we understand the land, each other. Everything has purpose, pattern." He stopped near a group of women preparing hides. "Like this, each woman has special skill. One scrapes best, one smokes best, one sews best. Together, make perfect robe." Sarah watched the women work, noting how their movements flowed together like a dance. One of them looked up and smiled, beckoning Sarah over. "Come," she said in Apache accented English. "Learn our ways." Takoda touched Sarah's shoulder lightly. "Go, learn, I return at sunset." He paused, then added softly, "You are safe here." As Sarah joined the women, she felt something shift inside her. Not the baby this time, but something deeper. The mountain winds carried away the last whispers of her old life, leaving room for something new to take root in the frozen soil of her heart. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's world expanded like ripples in a pond. Each day brought new lessons, not just in survival, but in seeing differently. Nijoni taught her the properties of healing plants, presenting her with a beaded medicine pouch to store her first dried herbs. "Plants speak," the old woman explained one morning, showing Sarah how to harvest bark from a pine tree. "Not with words like people. Speak with smell, with taste, with how they grow. You must learn their language." Sarah ran her fingers over the rough bark. "In my old life, we thought we knew everything about the world. We had books, sciences." She paused, remembering her schoolroom certainties. "But here, I feel like a child learning to read again." Nijoni's weathered face creased in a smile. "Good. Empty cup can be filled. Full cup spills everything." The medicine woman's wisdom was tested sooner than expected. That evening, as snow began to fall again, a hunting party returned early. 2 men supported a third between them, his leg badly gashed from a fall on icy rocks. Sarah was grinding herbs when they brought him into Nijoni's lodge. The wound was deep, already showing signs of infection. Without thinking, she reached for her medicine pouch, selecting the yarrow she'd gathered that morning. "Wait," a sharp voice commanded. It was Taluta, her eyes hard. "This is not your place." But Nijoni raised her hand. "Let her help. She must learn by doing." Working together, they cleaned and treated the wound. Sarah's teacher's hands proved steady as she stitched the gash closed with sinew thread, while Nijoni packed it with herbs and sang healing songs in a low, melodic voice. Later, as the injured man slept peacefully, Takoda appeared at the lodge entrance. He had been watching, Sarah realized, though she hadn't noticed him in her concentration. "You have healing hands," he said softly in his improving English. "Like my grandmother." "I was just helping," Sarah replied, cleaning her hands in a bowl of snow-melted water. "Taluta was right. I shouldn't have presumed." "No," Takoda's voice was firm. "You acted with heart, with skill. This is good." He sat beside her, closer than usual. "Many think white people only know destruction. You show different way." Sarah felt warmth rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. "Your people have shown me so much kindness. I just want to give something back." "You will." Takoda touched her medicine pouch gently. "Grandmother says you learn fast. Says Creator guided you here for purpose." The baby kicked then, strong enough that Takoda could see the movement through her new deerskin dress. His eyes widened slightly, and without thinking, Sarah took his hand and placed it on her belly. The child kicked again, as if in greeting. For a moment they sat in silence, connected by that small life stirring between them. Then Takoda drew back, something new and vulnerable in his expression. "Tomorrow," he said, rising, "I teach you to read weather signs, storm coming, big one, need to prepare." But the look that passed between them spoke of storms of a different kind, the kind that could change hearts as surely as winter changed the land. After he left, Nijoni emerged from the shadows where she had been watching. Her eyes were knowing. As she added wood to the fire, "Some medicines heal body," she said cryptically. "Some heal heart, both dangerous if not respected." She gave Sarah a pointed look. "Sleep now. Tomorrow brings new lessons." Sarah lay down on her furs, but sleep was long in coming. Her hand kept straying to where Takoda's had rested, feeling the child move beneath. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future here. Not just survival, but life. Real life with purpose and perhaps even joy. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the promise of snow. But within the lodge, wrapped in warm furs and warmer acceptance, Sarah felt only peace. The eagle feather in her hair brushed her cheek, its touch, no longer foreign but familiar, like the touch of an old friend, welcoming her home. The military dispatch arrived with the dawn. Joseph found it on a scout's body, a young soldier who had strayed too far from his patrol and succumbed to the cold. The paper was crisp and official, carrying news that shattered the peace of Sarah's new life. Missing, Sarah Mitchell, age 24, schoolteacher, last seen departing Wilson's trading post. Any information regarding her whereabouts should be reported to Fort Laramie immediately. Family offers substantial reward. Joseph read the words aloud in the council lodge, his voice hard. They search the wrong territory, but they search nonetheless. He fixed Sarah with a stern gaze. What aren't you telling us? Sarah's hands trembled as she touched the eagle feather in her hair, drawing strength from its presence. My family. They said they never wanted to see me again. Why would they offer a reward? Perhaps, Dakota spoke from the shadows, they fear scandal more than they hate shame. He moved to stand beside her, his presence steadying. Tell us everything. And so she did. The full story poured out. Thomas Crawford's attack, his father's influence, the town's condemnation. As she spoke, she saw understanding dawn in Joseph's eyes. They don't want to find you, he said slowly. They want to silence you. Dakota's hand found her shoulder, squeezing gently. No one will touch you here. But they endanger all of you, Sarah protested. If they expand the search, then we move. Joseph interrupted. We have survived worse. He studied the dispatch again. But you must choose, Sarah Mitchell. Stay and become truly one of us, or go back and face their justice. She stays. Nizoni's voice cut through the tension. The old woman entered the lodge like a spirit, her eyes bright with certainty. The child she carries will bridge two worlds. I have seen it. Sarah felt the baby move, as if in agreement. She thought of her old life, the prim schoolhouse, the rigid rules, the harsh judgment. Then she looked around the lodge at these people who had taken her in, taught her, protected her. I choose here, she said firmly. I choose my child's future over my past's shadows. Dakota's hand tightened on her shoulder. Later, he would tell her his own story. How his first wife died in childbirth. How he had sworn never to open his heart again. But that was yet to come. For now, Joseph nodded slowly. Then we burn this, he said, touching the dispatch to the lodge's fire, and pray your past burns with it. They watched the paper curl and blacken, military precision reduced to ash. As the flames died down, Nizoni began to sing, a low, powerful melody that seemed to vibrate in Sarah's bones. A blessing, Dakota whispered, for protection, for new beginnings. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering tracks, erasing signs of the past. Sarah thought of Thomas Crawford and his father, of her own family's betrayal, of all the neat, ordered lies that had shaped her former life. Here, in this lodge with these people, surrounded by song and firelight, those memories seemed to fade, like the burned dispatch, not gone, but transformed into something powerless. The future, uncertain as it was, called more strongly than any echo of the past. That night, as the storm raged outside, Sarah dreamed of her child running free under summer skies, equally at home in all worlds. When she woke, her cheeks were wet with tears, but they were tears of hope, not sorrow. The eagle feather brushed her face in the pre-dawn darkness, its touch a reminder. She was no longer the woman who had stumbled through that snowstorm. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone free. Sarah's hands moved steadily as she wove the blanket, incorporating both Apache patterns and the geometrical designs she remembered from her grandmother's quilts. Beside her, Nizoni nodded approvingly at the emerging design. Good, the old woman said. You weave two worlds together, like your child will do. Their quiet work was interrupted by shouts from the edge of camp. A hunting party had returned early, supporting two injured men. Sarah recognized Kitchi among them, blood staining his leggings. Rock slide, someone called out in Apache. Two hurt bad. Without waiting for permission, Sarah gathered her medicine pouch and hurried to help. Months of learning under Nizoni had taught her confidence, and her hands moved surely as she assessed the injuries. Kitchi had a deep gash in his thigh, while the other hunter's arm was clearly broken. Working together, Sarah and Nizoni set the bone and cleaned the wounds, their movements synchronized by practice. Sing, Najoni commanded as they worked. Medicine is more than herbs. Sarah's voice joined the old woman's, the healing songs, now as familiar as the hymns of her childhood. Around them, the tribe gathered, watching as white and Apache hands worked together to save their hunters. Hours later, with both men resting comfortably, Takoda found her by the stream where she was washing the blood from her hands. "You did well today," he said softly. "The tribe sees it, even those who doubted you." Sarah dried her hands on her dress, noticing how the beadwork caught the fading light. "I'm just grateful I could help. Kitchi saved my life that night in the storm. Today, I could repay a small part of that debt." "There is no debt between family," Takoda said. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah looked up, meeting his eyes. In the months since the dispatch incident, something had been growing between them, unspoken but real as the ground beneath their feet. "Takoda," she began, but he raised his hand. "Wait, there is something you should know." He sat beside her, his shoulder just touching hers. "My first wife, she died in childbirth. The midwife said the baby was turned wrong. I could not save either of them." Sarah's heart ached at the pain in his voice. "Is that why you saved me that night? At first, perhaps. But now—" He touched the eagle feather in her hair, his fingers lingering. "Now I see Creator had larger plan. You heal others, but maybe you also heal me." A flutter of movement in her belly drew both their attention. Without hesitation this time, Sarah took his hand and placed it where the baby kicked. Takoda's breath caught. "Strong," he whispered, "like its mother, like its future father." The words slipped out before Sarah could stop them. Takoda's hand stilled, but didn't withdraw. "You would accept such a thing, to be wife to an Apache warrior?" "I already accepted this as my people," Sarah said. "My heart simply followed where my feet had already walked." He smiled then, a rare, full smile that transformed his serious face. "My grandmother says you were born white by mistake, that your soul has always been Apache." From the main camp, voices rose in an evening song. The sun painted the snow in shades of rose and gold, and somewhere in the distance, an eagle cried out. "There will be those who oppose," Takoda warned. "Both your people and mine." Sarah thought of the half-finished blanket in her lodge, with its blended patterns. "Then we show them a new way, like this child will do." Takoda stood, drawing her up with him. His hands framed her face with infinite gentleness. "Tomorrow, I speak to the council. Tonight," he pressed his forehead to hers in the traditional Apache gesture of affection. "Tonight, we begin our story." As they walked back to camp together, Sarah felt the last pieces of her old identity fall away like autumn leaves. The woman who had taught grammar in a prim schoolhouse was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who could weave together different worlds into something new and beautiful. The eagle feather brushed her cheek in the evening breeze, blessing this transformation, this love, this future being born. In the depths of winter, the cavalry patrol appeared without warning on a bright winter morning. Sarah was gathering firewood with Taluta when they heard the scouts' warning calls. Through the trees, sunlight glinted off brass buttons and steel sabers. "Inside," Taluta hissed, pulling Sarah toward the nearest lodge. But it was too late. A shout went up from the soldiers. "There, a white woman!" The sound of hoofbeats grew closer. Sarah's heart pounded as she saw the patrol emerge from the trees. 12 men, led by a lieutenant whose young face was hard with purpose. A broken cavalry sword hung at his saddle, its blade stained with old blood. "Miss Mitchell?" the lieutenant called out. "Sarah Mitchell?" Before she could respond, Takoda appeared beside her, his rifle held casually but ready. Joseph materialized on her other side, and suddenly the woods were alive with Apache warriors, appearing like shadows among the trees. "This woman is under our protection," Joseph said in clear English. "She is here by choice." The lieutenant's face flushed. She's Been reported missing. We have orders to return her to her family. My family? Sarah stepped forward, one hand resting on her swollen belly. The same family that disowned me? Or do you mean the Crawfords, who want to silence me? Confusion flickered across the young officer's face. Ma'am, I don't know about any of that. I have my orders. And we have our laws, Dakota said quietly. She carries my child. She is Apache now. The lieutenant's hand moved to his pistol. An Apache? Miss Mitchell? Has this savage forced himself on you? Sarah felt rage rise in her throat. The only man who ever forced himself on me was Thomas Crawford, a pillar of white society. These savages saved my life and my child's life. They offered shelter when my own people cast me out. The soldiers shifted uneasily in their saddles. The lieutenant looked from Sarah to Dakota, then to the warriors hidden in the trees. His young face showed the strain of an impossible decision. Lieutenant, Joseph said smoothly, you have 12 men. We have many more, but blood need not be shed today. Return to your fort. Report that Sarah Mitchell chose her own path, that she is safe and well. And if I don't? Dakota's voice was soft, but carried clearly. Then you learn why the army fears Apache territory. A tense silence followed. Sarah could feel the weight of dozens of arrows aimed at the patrol. One wrong move would turn the snow red. Finally, the lieutenant raised his hand. Stand down, men. He looked at Sarah. You're certain this is your choice, Miss Mitchell? My name is Sarah, she said firmly. And yes, I have found my home. The lieutenant nodded slowly. Very well, but understand, others may come. The Crawfords have influence. They won't let this go easily. Then they will find us ready, Dakota said. The patrol wheeled their horses, preparing to leave. But the lieutenant paused, looking back at Sarah. For what it's worth, Miss Sarah, there were rumors about Thomas Crawford, other women, but his father's money kept them quiet. Sarah felt Dakota's hand slip into hers, warm and strong. Here, she said, truth matters more than money. They watched the patrol disappear into the trees. Only when the last hoofbeat faded did the tension break. Warriors emerged from their hiding places, and Sarah realized just how many weapons had been trained on the soldiers. They will be back, Joseph said grimly. With more men. Dakota nodded. Then we prepare. The winter camps can be moved. Our people have done it before. No, Sarah said suddenly. We shouldn't have to run. This is your land, our land. We defend it. The brothers exchanged a look that mingled surprise and approval. She speaks like Apache, Joseph said, a rare smile crossing his face. She is Apache. Nijoni's voice came from behind them. The old woman approached, carrying Sarah's medicine pouch. The time has come to prepare for battle, not with weapons, but with stronger medicine. As the camp burst into activity around them, Sarah felt the baby move restlessly. She pressed her hand to her belly, sending silent reassurance. They would face whatever came together. This child of two worlds, protected by the strength of its chosen people. The broken cavalry sword lay forgotten in the snow, a relic of old conflicts supplanted by new bonds, stronger than steel. The storm struck without warning, turning the twilight into a howling wall of white. Sarah's labor pains had begun at dawn, and now, as darkness approached, they grew stronger with each passing hour. Inside Nijoni's lodge, the air was thick with herbs and the sound of ancient songs. Breathe, Nijoni commanded, pressing a warm cloth to Sarah's forehead. The child chooses a powerful time to come. Sarah gripped the birthing ropes that hung from the lodge poles, swaying through another contraction. Around her, women moved, in practiced patterns. Taluta tending the fire, Mapia preparing clean cloths, others singing the birthing songs that had welcomed Apache babies for countless generations. Something's different, Sarah gasped as the contraction peaked. The pain, it's not like before. Nijoni's hands moved quickly over Sarah's belly, her expression changing. The baby turns wrong, she said in Apache to the other women, then to Sarah in English, like Dakota's first wife. Fear gripped Sarah's heart, but her healer's training took over. "There's a way," she panted. "In my old life, I saw it once. The doctor turned the baby." Nizhoni nodded sharply. "Show me." Between contractions, Sarah guided the old woman's hands, demonstrating the turning technique she'd witnessed years ago. Nizhoni's weathered fingers moved with surprising gentleness, combining Sarah's knowledge with her own decades of experience. Outside the lodge, they could hear men's voices, Dakota and Joseph among them, keeping vigil in the storm. A particularly strong gust shook the lodge poles, and Sarah cried out as another contraction seized her. "The baby turns," Nizhoni announced, "but now comes the hard part." She began a new song, one Sarah had never heard before. The other women joined in, their voices rising above the storm's fury. Sarah lost track of time, lost in a haze of pain and song and prayer. She found herself mumbling fragments of half-remembered hymns from her childhood, their words mingling with Apache prayers in a desperate symphony. "Good," Nizhoni encouraged. "Sing to your child. All spirits listen tonight." Through the fog of pain, Sarah became aware of another presence in the lodge. A figure seemed to stand in the shadows, a woman in Apache dress, her face both familiar and strange. "Dakota's first wife," Nizhoni whispered, seeing Sarah's gaze. "Fix on the shadow. She comes to help, not to harm. The dead know when to aid the living." Whether fever dream or spiritual truth, the presence brought a strange comfort. Sarah felt hands supporting her, both physical and ethereal, as her body worked to bring new life into the world. "The head comes," Taluta announced. "One more push, sister." Sarah gathered her remaining strength, thinking of everything that had led to this moment. The schoolhouse, the storm, the eagle feather that still hung above her sleeping furs. With a final cry that mixed English prayer and Apache song, she pushed. The baby's first cry pierced the storm's howl, strong and defiant. "A girl," Nizhoni proclaimed, her voice thick with emotion. "A perfect girl." They placed the child on Sarah's chest, tiny, red, and absolutely beautiful. She had Sarah's fair skin, but Dakota's dark hair, her features a perfect blend of both worlds. "She carries both medicines," Nizhoni said softly, touching the baby's cheek. "Just as I foresaw." The storm began to ease, as if it too had been waiting for this moment. Outside, they heard Dakota's voice raised in a song of thanks, joined by other warriors. "What will you name her?" Taluta asked, as she helped clean and wrap the infant. Sarah looked down at her daughter, seeing in her face all the possibilities of a new future. "Dawn," she said. "In Apache," she added, looking at Nizhoni. "Nalini," the old woman nodded. "A good name. She comes with the new day, bringing light." The shadow in the corner seemed to smile before fading away, its purpose fulfilled. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks, tears of joy, of gratitude, of triumph over death itself. As the women prepared mother and child for their first night together, Sarah heard the storm's last sigh fade into peace. Her daughter, Nalini, slept contentedly, unaware that her very existence had bridged ancient divisions and fulfilled ancient prophecies. The long night had ended. Dawn was finally here. Dawn broke crystal clear after the storm, painting the snow-covered world in shades of rose and gold. Inside Nizhoni's lodge, Sarah sat cross-legged on her sleeping furs, watching Nalini nurse. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around one of Sarah's braids, now adorned with beads marking her as a mother. "She has strong grip," Dakota said softly from the lodge entrance. "Like warrior." Sarah looked up, smiling. In his hands, he held something wrapped in soft hide. The baby's first pair of moccasins, so tiny they fit in his palm. "May I enter?" he asked formally, though he had barely left her side since the birth. "Of course." He settled beside them, his movements careful not to disturb the nursing baby. With infinite gentleness, he touched Nalini's dark hair. She has your nose, he observed. But here, he traced her chin. She is Apache. She's perfect, Sarah said. A miracle. 2 miracles. Dakota corrected. The child and her mother. He took a deep breath. Sarah, I must speak with you of important things. She felt her heart quicken. Since her labor began, there had been no time for private words between them. Now, looking at his face in the morning light, she saw both certainty and vulnerability. Among my people, he began, when a man wishes to take a wife, he must prove himself worthy, must show he can provide, protect, honor her. He laid the tiny moccasins beside them. I have made these with my own hands, as I would make all things. For our family, but before I ask what I wish to ask, you must know everything. From his medicine pouch he withdrew a small object that made Sarah catch her breath, her mother's gold locket. I found this, he said, that night in the storm. I followed your tracks backward, searching for signs of pursuit. The snow had nearly buried it. Sarah took the locket with trembling fingers. Inside, the photographs remained unchanged, her parents stern and proper, frozen in time. Why didn't you tell me before? At first you were too weak. Then I waited for you to speak of it. When you did not, I understood. Some things must be left in the past. He touched the locket gently. But now I return it, so you can choose freely. If you wish to return to your old life, I will understand. Sarah looked down at Nalini, then at the photographs in the locket. Finally, she closed it with a decisive click. My old life is in here, she said, holding up the locket. But my life now, my real life is here. My old life is in here, she said, holding up the locket. But my life now, my real life is here. She touched Nalini's cheek, then Dakota's hand. I choose this. I choose you. The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. From outside came the sound of drums. Joseph's doing, no doubt, awaiting his brother's signal. Then Sarah, who is no longer lost, Dakota said formally, I ask you to be my wife, to share my lodge, to raise our children, to walk the good path together until we are called to the spirit world. Yes, she said simply, in English and Apache both. Yes. He kissed her then, gentle and fierce at once, while Nalini slept peacefully. Between them, the drums outside grew louder, joined by singing voices as the tribe celebrated, but the joy was interrupted by a scout's call. Through the lodge walls they heard the warning, riders coming, many riders. Dakota was on his feet, instantly, but his expression remained calm. Now we show them, he said, helping Sarah up, the strength of a family united. Sarah wrapped Nalini warmly, the tiny moccasins secure on her feet. Together, they stepped out to face whatever came, the gold locket left behind on the sleeping furs, a relic of a past life already fading like morning mist in the winter sun. The wedding necklace caught the morning light as Nijoni fastened it around Sarah's neck. Strands of polished bone and blue trade beads alternated with silver coins and tiny crosses, a beautiful blend of both worlds, like the woman who would wear it. Every bead tells story, Nijoni explained, touching each one. This for strength, this for fertility, this for wisdom. Her weathered fingers paused on one of the crosses. And these remind us that good medicine can come from many places. Outside, the camp buzzed with dual purpose, wedding preparations intermingling with defensive measures. Warriors moved through combat drills, while women prepared feast foods. Children gathered ceremonial sage while also serving as lookouts. They're still coming, Joseph reported, ducking into the lodge. He'd traded his cavalry coat for full Apache warfare regalia, his face painted for battle. But slower than expected, the snow slows them. How many? Dakota asked. He sat nearby, crafting arrows with precise movements, pausing occasionally to touch Nalini's cheek as she slept in her new cradleboard. 20 riders, army-issue weapons. Joseph's face was grim. And Thomas Crawford rides with them. Sarah's hands stilled in their work of braiding sweet grass. He dares to come here, His father's money bought him a lieutenant's commission, Joseph spat. He leads the patrol. Dakota set down his arrows, moving to Sarah's side. We can delay the ceremony. Move the camp. No. Sarah's voice was firm as she stood, the wedding necklace catching the light. I won't let him take this from us too. We marry today as planned. She touched the necklace. Let him come. Let him see what I've chosen. Nijoni cackled approvingly. She speaks with warrior's heart now. A plan formed quickly. The wedding would proceed, but with modifications. Warriors would be stationed throughout the camp, disguised as ceremony participants. Women and children would be ready to retreat to prepared hiding places in the caves. Above the valley, every detail was considered, every contingency planned for. As the sun reached its peak, the ceremony began. Sarah wore a dress of soft buckskin, decorated with beadwork, that told the story of her journey from schoolteacher to Apache woman. Dakota stood tall in his finest garments, eagle feathers in his hair matching the one that still hung in Sarah's. Dark braids. The tribal elder spoke in Apache, his words translated by Joseph for Sarah's benefit. He spoke of two rivers joining to form one stronger flow, of different medicines combining to create powerful healing. As the Creator made day and night different, the elder said, yet made them dance together in perfect balance, so too can two peoples join in harmony. Sarah and Dakota exchanged the traditional gifts. She gave him a quiver, sewn with symbols of their shared story. He gave her a blanket he had helped weave himself, incorporating schoolhouse patterns into Apache designs, just as they were about to speak their vows. A sentry's call split the air. Riders, approach! But Sarah and Dakota didn't pause. Their hands remained clasped as they spoke the ancient words, first in Apache, then in English. Around them, warriors melted into position, while women quietly gathered the children. What God and Creator have joined, the elder proclaimed. Let no man tear asunder. As if in answer to his words, they heard the sound of horses entering the valley. Sarah held Nalini close, the wedding necklace gleaming against her skin like armor. Let them come, she said softly, feeling Dakota's strength beside her. Let them see that love is stronger than hate, that new ways can overcome old fears. The first riders appeared through the trees, Thomas Crawford's face visible beneath. His army hat. He reined his horse to a stop, taking in the scene before him, the wedding ceremony, the proud Apache warriors, and Sarah, transformed into something he could never have imagined. The moment balanced on a knife's edge between peace and war, between past and future, between two worlds that had always been separate, but now, in this place, began to merge. Thomas Crawford's face twisted as he took in the scene before him. His military maps, showing planned cavalry routes and strategic positions, crumpled in his white-knuckled grip. 20 soldiers shifted uneasily in their saddles behind him, their breath frosting in the cold air. "Sarah Mitchell," he called out, his voice carrying the entitled confidence of a man accustomed to having his way. "Your family has been searching for you. It's time to come home." Sarah stood straighter, Nalini secure in her ceremonial cradleboard. The wedding necklace caught the sunlight as she replied, "I am home, Thomas, and my name is no longer Mitchell." Dakota moved slightly in front of his new wife and child, his stance relaxed but ready. Around the ceremony space, wedding guests remained perfectly still, their festive garments concealing weapons at the ready. "This is a legal military action," Thomas announced, pulling a document from his coat. "We have orders to return you to civilization and," his eyes fixed on Nalini, "to investigate reports of a kidnapping." Joseph stepped forward, still in his ceremonial dress, but with his cavalry experience evident in his bearing. "Lieutenant Crawford," he said formally, "you interrupt a legal wedding ceremony with armed men. Consider your next actions carefully." A muscle twitched in Thomas's jaw. "Legal? These savages have no standing under territorial law, and that child is mine," Sarah's voice rang out clear and strong. "Mine and Dakota's. Born in love, not violence." Her eyes met Thomas's directly. "Unlike what you did to me in the schoolhouse." Several soldiers exchanged uncomfortable glances. One young corporal actually backed his horse a few steps. "Lies!" Thomas spat, but his face had reddened. "My father—" "Your father's money can't hide the truth here," Sarah cut him off. "How many others were there, Thomas? How many kept quiet?" Out of fear, Dakota's hand found Sarah's, their fingers intertwining. Behind them, Nijoni began to sing softly, an ancient song of protection. Other voices joined, the sound growing like wind through canyon walls. Thomas drew his pistol, pointing it at Dakota. "Silence! You'll come with us now, Sarah. This has gone far enough." In the tense silence that followed, the soft sound of Nalini's cooing seemed impossibly loud. The baby reached out toward a snowflake, completely unaware of the danger surrounding her. "Look at her," Sarah said softly. "Look at my daughter, Thomas. She is the future, a bridge between worlds. Would you destroy that future out of pride, out of fear?" "The child can come too," Thomas said, but his pistol hand shook slightly. "She'll be raised properly in civilization." "You speak of civilization," Dakota's calm voice carried across the space between them, "but bring violence to a wedding. Who then is the savage?" Suddenly, Joseph called out in English, "Colonel Adams, your presence honors us." Thomas whirled in his saddle as a new group of riders emerged from the trees behind his men. At their head rode a grey-haired officer whose uniform bore Colonel's insignia, Lieutenant Crawford. The Colonel's voice was arctic. "Would you explain why you've led an unauthorized patrol into treaty territory, and why you're pointing a weapon at a peaceful gathering?" The younger man's face drained of color. "Sir, I have orders. The only orders issued were to investigate reports of a missing woman." The Colonel rode forward, surveying the scene. His eyes fell on Sarah, taking in her ceremonial dress, the baby, and her clear expression. "Madam, are you being held here against your will?" "No, sir," Sarah replied firmly. "I am exactly where I choose to be." The Colonel nodded slowly. "And this appears to be your wedding day. My congratulations." He turned to his shocked lieutenant. "Crawford, lower your weapon. That's an order." Thomas hesitated for one terrible moment, his finger tightening on the trigger. But surrounded by his own commanding officer, uncertain soldiers, and dozens of Apache warriors, he finally lowered the pistol. "Lieutenant Crawford is relieved of command," the Colonel announced. "Corporal Williams, escort him back to the fort. He faces charges of unauthorized military action and—" He looked at Sarah. "Other matters we'll discuss later." As Thomas was led away, his face a mask of impotent rage, the Colonel dismounted. "Chief," he addressed the tribal elder, "with your permission, I would be honored to witness this ceremony. It's past time our peoples found ways to live together in peace." The military maps fell forgotten from Thomas's saddle, their neat lines and strategic marks meaningless now in the face of a different kind of victory. One won not with weapons, but with love, truth, and the courage to forge a new path. As Crawford was led away, the peace pipe emerged from beneath ceremonial blankets. The tribal elder held it with dignified grace, its polished surface reflecting the winter sunlight. The pipe had been used for generations to seal treaties, mark peace between enemies, and bless significant moments. "Colonel," the elder spoke, "through Joseph's translation, will you share the pipe of peace? Let this wedding be more than one couple's union. Let it mark a new beginning between our peoples." Colonel Adams removed his hat, revealing grey hair and eyes that had seen too. "Much bloodshed. I would be honored," he said, accepting the pipe with appropriate reverence. The ritual smoking moved through the gathered circle, Apache warriors, remaining soldiers, wedding guests, binding them all in the ancient ceremony of peace. Sarah watched as old barriers seemed to dissolve with each shared breath. Nijoni stepped forward, her aged voice strong and clear. "Now we finish what was begun. A marriage blessed by both peoples will be twice blessed." She turned to the Colonel. Will you stand witness for your people as our elder stands for ours? I would be proud to, Adams replied, understanding the significance of the moment. The wedding ceremony resumed, but now with added depth. Where before there had been tension underlying the joy, now there was a sense of witnessing something truly historic. Apache prayers mingled with Christian blessings, neither diminishing the other. Dakota and Sarah exchanged their vows again, this time with both the colonel and the elder blessing their union. When Dakota spoke in Apache, his voice carried the strength of his people's traditions. When Sarah responded in English, her words bridged the gap between worlds. I take you as my husband, she said clearly, before all peoples, under one sky, in the sight of God and Creator both. Then she repeated the words in carefully practiced Apache, earning proud smiles from the tribe. Dakota's response came in both languages as well, his English carefully pronounced, I take you as my wife before all witnesses, pledging to walk the good path together, protecting our family with all that I am. Nalini chose that moment to laugh, a bright sound that caught everyone by surprise. The baby reached out from her cradleboard, catching one of her father's eagle feathers and holding on tight. Even the children show us the way, Colonel Adams commented softly. If we're wise enough to learn from them. The elder raised his hands, speaking words of blessing that Joseph translated, what was broken is now mended. What was separated is now joined. Let no one tear apart what the Creator has blessed this day. The celebration that followed broke down the last barriers between the two groups. Soldiers who had arrived ready for battle found themselves sharing Apache feast foods, attempting to learn tribal dances, and playing with the children who no longer saw uniforms, but only new friends. Sarah moved through the celebration with Nalini in her arms, Dakota at her side. She passed the spot where Thomas's military maps had fallen. Someone had used them to start one of the cooking fires, their ashes rising into the winter sky like prayers. Colonel, she said, approaching Adams as he admired the tribe's horses, with Joseph. Thank you. Not just for today, but for showing that change is possible. The older man smiled sadly. I've seen too much blood spilled over fears and misunderstandings. Perhaps it's time we all learn to see with new eyes. He touched Nalini's small hand gently. This little one was born into a better world than the one I grew up in. Let's make sure it stays that way. As evening approached, the colonel prepared to lead his men back to the fort. But before he left, he made a formal declaration. This valley would be recognized as protected tribal land, and the marriage would be registered as legal under territorial law. Love, Nijoni observed as they watched the soldiers ride away peacefully, is the strongest medicine of all, stronger than hate, stronger than fear, stronger than any weapon ever made. Dakota gathered Sarah and Nalini close as the stars began to appear above the mountains. The peace pipe had been put away, but its medicine lingered, marking not an ending but a beginning, for their family, for their peoples, for the future itself. The sacred war shield hung on Dakota's back as he rode. Through the pre-dawn darkness, its surface, painted with protective symbols and adorned with eagle feathers, caught the faint starlight. He'd carried it through many battles, but never had the stakes felt higher. Riders approaching from the south, the scout reported. At least 30 men, not military. Joseph's face hardened. Crawford's men. His father's money buys many guns. The news had reached them 2 days after the wedding. Thomas Crawford had escaped custody, and his father had hired mercenaries. Not for rescue this time, but for revenge. Sarah stood in the lodge entrance, Nalini strapped securely to her back. They won't stop, will they? No, Dakota said softly. Men like Crawford cannot accept defeat. Their pride demands blood. The tribe had prepared well. Women and children were already safely hidden in the high caves with enough supplies to last weeks. Warriors had positioned themselves throughout the valley, using knowledge gathered over Generations to maximum advantage. You should go to the caves, Dakota told Sarah, touching her cheek gently. No, her voice was firm. I'm trained in medicine now. You'll need healers. She touched the war shield on his back. Besides, this fight is as much mine as yours. Nijoni emerged from her lodge, carrying something wrapped in old buckskin. Then you'll need this. She unveiled a second war shield, smaller but no less sacred. My husband's shield. He died protecting our people from men like Crawford. Now it protects his successor. Sarah accepted the shield with appropriate reverence. Its surface bore symbols of healing mixed with those of protection, a perfect reflection of her dual role. The first light of dawn revealed the approaching riders. Hard men with cold eyes and weapons bought with Crawford money. Thomas rode at their head, his lieutenant's uniform replaced with civilian clothes, his face twisted with hatred. "Last chance, Sarah," he shouted across the valley. "Send out the woman and the half-breed child, and we'll let the rest of you savages live." The answer came in the form of an Apache war cry, echoing off the canyon walls. Warriors seemed to materialize from the very rocks, their positions carefully chosen over generations of defending their homeland. "You never understood, Thomas," Sarah called back, her voice carrying clearly. "Love is stronger than hate, and I am no longer yours to command." The battle erupted with sudden fury. Crawford's men were many and well armed, but they fought on Apache land against warriors who knew every rock and tree. Dakota's war shield deflected bullets as he led the defense, its medicine proving as strong as ever. Sarah worked tirelessly, moving between the wounded with Nalini secure on her back. Her hands remained steady as she treated both Apache warriors and fallen mercenaries without distinction. "A healer's duty," she had told Nijoni, "knows no sides." The turning point came when Thomas, enraged by his men's failures, spotted Sarah tending to a wounded warrior. He raised his rifle, hatred overcoming sense. "If I can't have you," he screamed, "no one will." But before he could fire, Joseph appeared. Behind him like a spirit, Crawford's shot went wild as Joseph tackled him from his horse. The two men rolled in the snow, fighting for control of the rifle. "Enough!" Joseph's voice rang out as he pinned Crawford down. "Your hatred ends today." Other mercenaries, seeing their leader captured and their attack failing, began to surrender. Some simply fled, having no stomach for dying over another man's obsession. Thomas Crawford lay in the snow, Joseph's knee firmly in his back, watching his vengeance crumble. The war shield on Sarah's back caught the morning sun as she approached. Nalini peeking over her shoulder with curious eyes. "Look at me, Thomas," Sarah said softly. "Look at what you can never destroy. I am Apache now, a wife, a mother, a healer. Your hatred has no power here." As tribal warriors secured the remaining mercenaries, Dakota joined his family. His war shield and Sarah's hung side by side, their medicines united, their protection proven. The valley slowly returned to peace, though the snow was stained red in places. Sarah moved among the wounded, Apache and mercenary alike, offering healing to all. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could about the path forward, one where hatred could be transformed into understanding, where old wounds could finally begin to heal. The treaty document lay unrolled on a blanket in the council lodge, its formal language a stark contrast to the simple power of the gathering. Colonel Adams had returned, this time with a federal judge and proper witnesses. On one side sat the tribal council, on the other territorial representatives. Between them sat Sarah and Dakota, with Nalini sleeping peacefully in her cradle board. "Let the record show," the judge announced, "that Thomas Crawford has confessed to his crimes both against Mrs. Sarah." He paused, looking at Sarah questioningly. "Dakota," she supplied firmly. "Sarah Dakota. Against Mrs. Sarah Dakota and against several other women who have since come forward. The Crawford family's influence in the territory is ended." Joseph, still wearing his mixture of Apache and cavalry clothing, but now with added honor badges from both cultures, translated everything into Apache. The tribal elder nodded slowly, his aged face showing cautious hope. "But we are not here merely to speak of endings," Colonel Adams said, indicating the treaty. "This document establishes this valley as protected tribal land, with recognized rights for its people. It also," he smiled slightly, "creates a formal position for a liaison between our peoples, someone who understands both worlds." Sarah felt Dakota's hand find hers as she realized what the colonel was suggesting. "You want me to be this liaison?" "Who better?" the colonel asked. "You've already built bridges we thought impossible. The territory needs more of that medicine." Nijoni cackled from her place by the fire. "See, the old dreams speak true. The child brings new ways, and the mother builds the path." The tribal elder spoke at length, Joseph translating, "We accept this treaty not from weakness, but from wisdom. Our children should grow in peace, learning the best of all ways." One by one, the signatures and marks were added to the document. Sarah signed her new name with quiet pride, watching the ink dry on the paper. Beside her signature, Dakota pressed his thumbprint, then added his name in carefully practiced English. "Letters. There is one more matter," the judge said, producing another document. "The territorial governor has reviewed the evidence about the circumstances of your departure from Massachusetts, Mrs. Dakota. He's issued a formal exoneration of all alleged wrongdoing." Sarah accepted the paper with steady hands, reading the formal declaration of her innocence. All the shame, all the whispered accusations, all the weight of social condemnation, dissolved by simple truth. "Thank you," she said quietly, "but my home is here now." "As it should be," Colonel Adams agreed, "but now it's a home protected by law as well as love." The celebration that followed blended both cultures seamlessly. Apache songs mingled with military band music brought by the colonel's men. Children played games that combined elements from both worlds, their laughter a testament to how easily the young could adapt. Sarah moved through the celebration, Nalini awake now and watching everything with bright eyes. She had just finished, helping Nijoni distribute medicine bundles to interested soldiers' wives when Dakota found her. "Happy?" he asked simply. Sarah looked around at this life she had found, so different from anything she could have imagined in her schoolteacher. "Days, more than happy," she replied. "Complete." A young Apache girl ran past, chasing a soldier's son in some new game they'd invented. Behind them, Joseph was teaching a group of fascinated officers traditional Apache hunting signals, while several warriors examined cavalry saddles with professional interest. "The world changes," Dakota observed, "like river carving new path through stone." "Is it hard?" Sarah asked. "Seeing so much change come to your people?" Dakota considered this, absently, letting Nalini grab his finger. "Change comes always. Secret is to guide it like river, not fight it like stone." He smiled at his daughter. "Besides, change brought you to us, brought her. How can this be bad?" From the darkness beyond the fires came the cry of an eagle, a rare sound at night. Everyone paused, recognizing the power of the sign. "See?" Nijoni's voice carried clearly. "Even the eagles bless this new path." Sarah touched the war shield that now hung with honor in their lodge, its surface reflecting firelight. "From this day forward," she said in Apache, her accent now almost perfect, "we walk the good path together." "All paths," Dakota corrected gently. "Together." 1 year later, the valley bloomed with spring flowers, their colors bright against the retreating snow. The mixed-culture family portrait hung in Sarah and Dakota's lodge, painted by a traveling artist who had been fascinated by their story. In it, Sarah wore her wedding necklace and Apache dress, while Dakota stood proud in traditional garments. Nalini, now walking and beginning to speak in both languages, sat between them wearing clothes that, like her, bridged both worlds. Sarah stood at the entrance of the lodge, watching the morning unfold. The valley had changed in subtle but significant ways over the past year. A small schoolhouse stood near the center of the camp, where she taught both Apache and settler children together. The lessons blended Western education with traditional knowledge, creating something entirely new. "Teacher!" A young Apache boy ran up, clutching a book in one hand and an eagle feather in the other. "Look what my grandmother gave me for learning. To read." Sarah smiled, remembering her own eagle feather, now carefully preserved alongside Takoda's war shield. "That's wonderful, running deer. Will you read to the younger children today?" The boy nodded eagerly and ran off. More children were gathering for the day's lessons, some from the tribe, others from nearby settler families who had discovered that the savage school actually offered their children unique and valuable knowledge. Takoda appeared on horseback, returning from an early patrol. Now he served as both tribal warrior and territorial peace officer, helping maintain the delicate balance between the two worlds. Joseph had helped establish this new role, drawing on his experience in both cultures. "The summer traders approach," he reported, dismounting to kiss Sarah and sweep Nalini into his arms. "And with them, something special for you." Later that day, a wagon rolled into the valley. Among the usual trade goods was a letter that made Sarah's heart skip, not with fear this time, but with joy. It was from one of her former students in Massachusetts, a girl who had finally found the courage to speak out against Thomas Crawford. Her testimony, along with others, had ensured he would never harm another woman. "She asks if she might come west," Sarah told Takoda as they prepared for the evening meal. "She wants to learn our ways of healing." Nijoni, her hair now completely white but her eyes still sharp, looked up from where she was teaching Nalini. "To string beads. The circle grows," she said simply, "as it should." The valley had become a place of healing for many, besides Sarah. People came seeking everything from medical treatment that blended Western and Apache knowledge to the simple peace of a place where different worlds met in harmony. Each brought their own gifts, their own stories, their own medicines to add to the whole. That evening, as the sun painted the sky in brilliant colors, the tribe gathered for a celebration. It was the anniversary of the peace treaty, now marked as a holiday by both Apache and settler communities. The peace pipe was passed, stories were shared, and children played games that would have been impossible a year ago. Sarah sat beside Takoda, watching Nalini toddle between her two grandmothers, Nijoni and, in a development that still amazed her, her own mother. The letter had come 3 months ago, full of apology and hope. Now the older woman spent part of each year in the valley, learning to see the world through new eyes. "Did you ever imagine this?" Sarah asked Takoda, gesturing to the scene before them. Apache warriors teaching settler children to track, former cavalry officers learning tribal dances, women from both cultures exchanging medicines and methods. "Creator imagined it," he replied, his arm warm around her shoulders. "We just listened." As if to emphasize his words, an eagle circled overhead, its cry carrying clearly to the gathering below. Everyone paused, remembering that night a year ago when another eagle had blessed their new beginning. Nalini pointed up at the bird. "Eagle!" she declared in English, then repeated it in Apache, drawing proud smiles from both grandmothers. Sarah touched her wedding necklace, feeling the crosses and beads that symbolized her journey. From outcast to bridge builder, from victim to healer, from lost soul to found heart, every step had led her here, to this place of belonging. The future stretched before them like the valley itself, full of challenge and promise. There would be hard days ahead, new barriers to break, old wounds still to heal. But here, in this place where love had proven stronger than hatred, where understanding had defeated fear, anything seemed possible. As the stars began to appear, above the mountains, Sarah looked at her family, all of her family, blood and chosen, Apache and settler, past and future. In their faces she saw the truth that had saved her in that desperate winter, that the human heart, like the eagle feather, that had first marked her acceptance, knows no boundaries except those we choose to believe in.